tonight's lesson, and I'll explain the title when we get through the review of of Sunday's lesson. Tonight's lesson will be called Serving God in the Long, Hot Dog Days of Summer. You ever hear the expression of the dog days of summer? And that's been a big thing over the history of baseball, probably, because when you're getting into August, late August, and it's so hot every time. There were no indoor stadiums, everybody played baseball outside. Most people still do, but there are some indoor ballparks now, and you can put the air condition on. But I tell you, when you're playing on most ballparks have artificial turf nowadays, and if it's 100 degrees out in the afternoon when you're playing, on that turf it's probably 115. And you got to play that game, and the playoffs are probably still weeks away. You got to get all through September before the playoffs start. And so you got to find the willpower, if you're in contention, to go out there in the grinding heat day after day and not get lazy and start losing games and miss the playoffs.
That's why they like to pour cold water.
Yeah, well, I guarantee you they got cold water on the sideline. Now, again, a lot of people now have, the Twins had an indoor stadium, but now they built an outdoor one. Vikings built a new stadium where the Twins stadium used to be, the Metrodome. The two of them shared it. But the Twins are back to outdoor baseball. But then again, the Twins don't fight up in Minnesota with heat as much as they do in some of the other cities. Still get hot and humid. But that's what that title for tonight's lesson will reference, is Serving God in the Long, Hot Dog Days of Summer. In other words, staying consistent in your dedication to baseball for those guys and serving God for us. Now, the heat outside isn't what we're talking about, and we'll get into that as soon as we get through the review. Sunday morning, we talked about spankings are not meant to be enjoyable. And we covered verses 6 through 11 of this 12th chapter. We'll be into verses 12 through 15 on tonight's lesson. But in review, verse 6 said, For whom the Lord loveth, he chastises. Well, actually, the King James uses the term chasteneth, but the idea of chastisement is involved. And scourges every son whom he receiveth. If you endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? So, of course, we learn some things from these couple verses. The love of a parent causes that parent to want to train a child to be a responsible citizen. And so in the training, up until we in America got smarter than God, parents spank their children sometimes. Now most parents are scared to death to spank their child, even if they believe it's a biblical teaching, because if a neighbor reports you, DHS could come in and take that child out of your home. And so it's amazing what happens when a country gets smarter than God. Isn't that amazing? We learn all kinds of stuff when a country gets smarter than God. And that's where we're at in America right now. So 1 Corinthians 9:27, we've been comparing in this idea of discipline, two kinds of discipline. A parent's discipline with the child, whether that's a spanking, whether it's tongue lashing, whatever it is, the parent disciplining a child and comparing that to the athlete disciplining himself, the coach disciplining the athlete, and so forth. So, and of course, coaches don't spank players. but they get in the ear of players. I mean, they get in the ear of players. So we're talking about those things. Now listen, and athletes, listen to what Paul said about himself. He was, in 1 Corinthians 9, he was, again, comparing running a race, Christians running a race. He was comparing that to the Roman games. And again, the Roman games of Paul's day was somewhat similar to the Olympics of our day. And so he talks about how an athlete has to train hard if he wants the gold. I don't know if it was gold back then. I never studied it that deep, but the big prize, the number one prize. If you want that, you got to really discipline yourself. So Paul said after he talked about that in chapter 9 of 1 Corinthians, he summed up that thought by saying, well, in the King James, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Most commentaries believe that last part, I become a castaway, means that he doesn't win the gold. He's not talking about salvation here. He's talking about winning the prize he's after. And and he goes so far as to say the athlete goes to all that dedication to win a gold medal that 2 years or 4 years from now in the next Olympics, if he doesn't win it again, somebody else will have the gold medal. So he said, it's a corruptible crown. It fades away. You win the World Series in baseball, next year someone else wins the World Series. For 1 year you can say you're the world champions. If you don't win it the next year, you can't say it anymore. Somebody else has now won the crown. And so Paul's saying if those athletes will go to so much dedication to win something that'll pass away, shouldn't we Christians that are pursuing an incorruptible crown, one we'll have forever? It'll be something that is awarded to us in heaven, and we should use all dedication. So Paul said, I keep under my body. Now, the Greek word for keeping under the body, you see it there, hupopiazo. I don't know if the pronunciation is correct, but in the Greek, here's what it actually means. To beat black and blue. To smite so as to cause bruises in livid spots. That's what Sayer's Greek dictionary says, that in the Greek, that's what that phrase where Paul said, I beat my body. In essence, he's talking about an athlete punishing his body, doing to it what the body in and of itself doesn't want to do, to make it the best body of any athlete in that sport, because they want to win the prize. And so the challenge is, we should be that dedicated to the Christian walk. So, verse 8 and 9, if you be without chastisement, whereof are all partakers, then you are bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? So we understand Paul is, in essence, defending God. God has a right to punish his children. And what is the manifestation of his punishment? It could be different things. And again, the same as blessing his children. When he blesses his children, his blessing to you might be one thing, his blessing to me might be another. So it's hard to put a handle on it. But punishment, I believe, is much like, because we were created in the image of God, I believe it's much the way like the parents want to do it today, those who still believe in spanking. I believe they always want to start off with words. Son, don't do that anymore. Daughter, don't do that anymore. And they want words to correct the child so it doesn't have to go any farther. But if rebellion sets in and the child ignores words, then the punishment takes on a different form. And I believe God's the same way. when we need correction, the number one way God chooses is this book right here, the Bible. One of these days when you're sitting in a church service somewhere or in your car listening to a sermon on the radio, and there's an area of your life that needs corrected, God's going to make sure to highlight that area when you're listening to a sermon somewhere. And His desire, I never say His hope. God doesn't hope for anything. He already knows what the future will bring. Again, I can't disappoint God. He already knows what I'm going to do the rest of my life. He never expects anything from me that I'm not going to deliver. I can disappoint you because you might expect more than I give. But I can't disappoint God. There is a certain rest in that. But nonetheless, God's number one desire is the Word of God, He says, is profitable for rebuke, for correction. So He wants His Word to correct us to where we see ourselves walking out of line with it. When we hear the Word, He wants the Word to bring us back in the line. And if it doesn't, and we rebel, then what does a spanking from God look like? I personally believe He just allows the process of sowing and reaping. Whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. There are a lot of times when we're trying to follow God, we don't reap what we sow. We do some stupid stuff, we tell God we're sorry, and we don't harvest the tragedy of the stupid thing we did. In other words, we don't reap what we sow. But there are times, if we're living in rebellion, I believe God allows our stupidity to receive its just due. And that's one way God judges. All right, let's go on to tonight's lesson. Right after I take a sip of this here coffee. So again, the title is tonight, Serving God in the Long, Hot Dog Days of Summer. Serving God in the long, hot dog days of summer. And again, I draw that phrase from all the years I've been a baseball fan. I haven't heard that expression. Of course, I don't listen to a lot of play-by-play anymore. But in baseball, again, that always referred, it's a long season. I mean, it's 6 months long. And, I mean, you start in April, May, June, July, August, September. Yeah, it's a 6-month season before the playoffs. And, again, you got an outdoor stadium in late July and all of August. You're going to have some hot, hot days. And those hot, hot days are going to be hard to play in because you've been playing a long season already, and now the game gets tougher because of the heat on the field. And so the baseball announcers used to call that the long, hot days or dog days of summer. And so we're going to talk about where that expression comes from. First of all, though, we're going to look at verse 12. After he's been encouraging us in understanding that sometimes, because God loves us, He has to chastise us. Verse 11 says that again. Now He says, cheer up. In verse 12, Wherefore lift up your hands which hang down in the feeble knees. Good News Bible. Lift up your tired hands and then strengthen your trembling knees. So the author has just told us that bad things that life throws at us are utilized by our loving Father as a means to train us to run a race well. And again, that's what I've been talking about. To me, the punishment of God takes on the character of us reaping what we sow. And so the idea is the author has told us that God takes what we're reaping because of our rebellion and translate that thing into discipline that's intended to bring us closer to God and make us a more mature believer. Now, after saying that, so he's saying, be encouraged. You feel like God's been after you a little bit? Be encouraged. That means He loves you. He looks at you as His child. And so be encouraged. And then I go into the whole baseball thing and where that expression of dog days comes from. Baseball talks about the dog days of summer. Turns out that dog days refer to the dog star. And that star is Sirius. That's the name of the star. I am being serious, but that's the name of the star, Sirius. And its position in the heavens. So that's what the dog days come from. To the Greeks and Romans, the dog days occurred around the day when Sirius appeared to rise before the sun in late July. They referred to these days as the hottest time of the year, a period that could bring fever or even catastrophe. Canis Major is a constellation in the southern celestial hemisphere. Do you know where that's at? Canis Major? Oh. Yeah. Because I know you pay attention to the universe some. But Canis Major is a constellation in the southern celestial hemisphere and is counted among the 88 modern constellations. Its name in Latin is for greater dog, in contrast to Canis Minor. So you have two constellations, a collection of stars. One is Canis Major, and they refer to it as the greater dog, and the other is Canis Minor, the lesser dog. Both figures are commonly represented as following the constellation of Orion, the hunter through the sky. So the hunter's got a couple hunting dogs with him in Greek and Roman legend. Canis Major contains the dog star, Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, known as the dog star. So we use, again, in baseball, we use the dog days of summer to refer to the almost unbearable heat of summer beginning in July and lasting into August. Baseball uses that term to describe the effort it takes during the long baseball season to stay focused in the dog days of summer when the playoffs are weeks away yet. Sometimes we grow weary during the sometimes unbearable heat that comes from all the trouble we face in our Christian walk. It's a different kind of heat. But it's the same idea. When it gets hot, we get discouraged. Our hands hang down and our legs feel weak. Thus the verse there in verse 12, lift up the hands which hang down and the feeble knees. So the idea is we need to beat the body like Paul talked about. It's not comfortable sometimes when things aren't going the way we want it. In weather, hot means hot. In the rest of life, unbearable heat just means things aren't going the way we want them to, and it's putting a lot of pressure on us in one area or another. So the idea of hot can mean different things depending what you're talking about. JFB said, that's Jamison, Fawcett, and Brown, straight path for your feet, let your walk be so firm or so unanimous in the right direction that a plain track and highway may be thereby established for those who accompany and follow you. And do you know the Apostle Paul said something when he was trying to bring Christians along in the Christian walk? He said, follow me as I follow Christ. The man had tremendous confidence in his walk with the Lord. He said, if you have a hard time knowing how to follow Christ because you don't see Him, then follow me as I follow Christ. You call him a coach. Although in sports a lot of times the coaches are older and they have to coach and say, do as I say, not as I can do. A lot of them are too old to do what they insist the players have to do in order to win game. whichever sport it might be. But we need to keep on walking, as the Good News Bible said, on straight paths, so that the lame foot may not be disabled. So, as I said in an earlier lesson, we as mature Christians need to be all in. Let me add now, we need to be all in even in the dog days of summer or amidst the trials of life. In our profession of faith and in our conduct, we need to present a straight, constant truth for those who are weaker in the faith to follow. If we confuse them with an inconsistent message, the weak-kneed will become too lame to walk the path. But if we stay consistent in the teaching of the gospel, those weak-kneed believers will grow stronger in the faith and be healed. So, again, JFB often deals with the Greek meaning of the phrases where it says straight paths for your feet. It means the idea there is to cease to halt between Judaism and Christianity. Now, twice, why does Bengal, well, JFB was quoting a guy named Bengal, so I had a question under that. Why does Bengal suggest the idea of ceasing to halt between Judaism and Christianity? We talked earlier in our study of Hebrews how the Hebrew Christians were confronted with the idea of rejecting Christianity and reverting to the Jewish faith as a means to show their patriotism as their country was preparing to go to war with Rome to free Israel from being subject to Roman rule. So you find that twice in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 6 verses 4 to 8 and Hebrews 10 verses 25 to 31. So the author of Hebrews here is encouraging the spiritually strong Christians among the Hebrew Jews to walk a straight path so as to set a clear example in their conduct to those who were considering such action. When you're getting all this political pressure, patriotism is a word to throw around. You think, man, if my neighbors are going to war against Rome, which, looking back at history, was about as dumb a thing as you could do. I mean, Rome was way vastly superior in military might to Israel. So why would they do it? Well, I'm sure they read their Old Testament and seen God give them some amazing victories over superior enemies. And so they thought, well, God will do it again. Except the problem was, when God won them battles in the Old Testament, they were following the correct teaching of the time, the law of Moses. Now, in the New Testament, the law of Moses has been, as the means through which God deals with His people, has been supplanted by the doctrine of grace, faith in God, faith and grace, right up there on the wall. And so, if you're not walking in faith with the Son, you don't have the God's favor like they had in the Old Testament when they were doing their best to keep the law of Moses, because that's the only revelation they had. So they might have thought, because of all those miracle victories in the Old Testament, God would help them against Rome. But these weren't Christians. They hadn't moved on to the new revelation of God. They weren't walking in line with the current revelation from God the way they were in the Old Testament. So they were on their own against the most powerful force on the planet at that time, Roman military might. But still, when you think of all that, there's something. You remember 9/11? I think a lot of us, that day in 2001, I think a lot of us had this mentality: hand me a rifle and point me in a direction. We couldn't believe that our country had been attacked that way. 2 world wars and no bloodshed on our continent. Now, Pearl Harbor was our territory, but it wasn't our country. So we had been free of anything like 9/11 for a very long time. Now, we had some bloodshed, of course, in the earlier wars when we fought for liberty against Britain, and then we had the French-Indian War, and worst of all, when we were killing each other in the Civil War. But as far as a force from another country, when England came over here on ships, they were a vastly superior army, but they were dumb. They were polite. You can't be polite in war. America beat them because America wasn't polite. You say, what in the world are you getting at? England just started marching right towards you with the music playing, not hiding behind rocks or anything. What was America doing? They were hiding behind trees and rocks and shooting them. You can be polite after the shooting's done. During the shooting, you know what? If someone's shooting on me, I don't feel like being polite. I don't think I would. No one's ever shot at me. But what happened on 9/11 was shocking to the senses of every American. And so you can wrap your brain for a week. Democrats and Republicans got along. That was about it for about a week. But they got along. That was the result of being attacked on our soil. Now, having said all that, again, one of my first thoughts was hand me a rifle and show me where to point it. An American thought that all over the country. So you can imagine the pressure coming to bear on these Christian Jews when the non-Christian Jews, those still walking under Old Testament teaching, were saying, we're going to throw the Roman control off of us. We're going to war. They weren't going to try to conquer Rome. They were just going to try to push Rome out of Israel. They weren't looking for a complete victory. They just wanted to make it too bloody for Rome to want to stay in Israel. And so you can imagine the patriotism. Think of what you felt on 9/11 and the pressure going on with those Christian Jews being pressured. We need to unite, give up that Christianity foolishness, and re-embrace Judaism. So JFB, again, quoting Bengal, said, we needed to, when it talked about straight paths for your feet, we needed to cease to halt between Judaism and Christianity. If you're a Christian, it trumps all else. You follow Christ. No matter what the enticement, you follow Christ. So, again, if you want to, I don't know what kind of Bible programs, you ought to have some on your computer, but if you want to study those areas, I have the verses, the two areas in Hebrews, chapter 6, verses 4 to 8, chapter 10, 25 to 31. So, what's he telling us to do? Again, run with purpose. To the Christian Jews, remember this book is called Hebrews. That's one reason, because Paul was known as the apostle to the Gentiles. It's one reason some doubt that he wrote this. But boy, if you read the book of Romans, he loved his fellow Jews. If you read the book of Acts, you found out every time he went to a city to preach to the Gentiles, the first thing he'd do when he got there, if there was a Jewish temple, he'd go in and try to convert some Jews. He loved the Jews. But nonetheless, he wants all Christians to walk a straight path, know that your walk with Christ is more important than anything else. And then he said in verse 14, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. So, there are Christians today who will read a verse like that and say, if you're not holy, you're not going to heaven. And they will translate that to me, and they are right, without holiness no man will see the Lord. But they will translate that to mean your conduct must be above board. In other words, you must earn your trip to heaven by doing the right thing. The doctrine of grace is all about you can't earn your way to heaven. You have to accept a free gift from God to get to heaven because you already flunked the test. Somebody I know wrote a song called The Big Red F. Once you get that F, you can't undo it. You failed the test. The only way to heaven now is to accept the grace of Jesus Christ who came and passed the test on your behalf. But nonetheless, let's look at that. The word holiness. Verse 14, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Holiness, hagiamos, in the Greek dictionary, is used 10 times in the New Testament, in the King James. 10 times. I never know why translators do this. It'd be easier if they'd stay consistent. But 5 of those 10 times the King James translators rendered that word hagiamos as holiness. The other 5 times they rendered it as sanctification. What I want you to see is they're the same word, rendered 2 different ways in the King James Bible. In other words, 2 equals 2, holiness equals sanctification. They're not different words, they're just different translations of the same word, literally. So, when translators do that, they think a certain rendering of that word will fit the text better. But sometimes what it does is cause confusion. Now, what is sanctification? Because whatever sanctification is, holiness is. Because it's the same Greek word. So what is sanctification? Sanctification has the idea to it of being separated onto. And so, in the Christian dogma, it means to be separated from a profane use onto a sacred use. So I put it in words I think people can relate to better. When God separated me from a profane use that I was in before I was saved, onto a sacred use as being part of His family, I word it this way. God, when He saved me, took me out of the world's pile of stuff and put me in His pile of stuff. That's what sanctification is. What makes me sanctified unto God is God calls me His. That's it. God said, you weren't mine, now you're mine. The temple in the Old Testament was holy unto God. Why? It was a building. It was holy unto God because God said, that's my building. The utensils in the temple were holy unto God. What we would call forks and knives and spoons were holy unto God. They were a little nicer than our forks and knives and spoons. They were made of gold. But that's not what made them special. God said they're mine. The city of Jerusalem was holy unto God. Why? Because God wrote His name on it and said, that's my city. The nation of Israel, the people, were holy unto God. Why? Because God separated them from all people on the planet and said, you're my people. How many of you are getting the idea? What makes you holy is when God said, you belong to me. Doesn't matter what it is. It's more special when it's the person. But it doesn't matter what it is. If for some reason that I would never understand, if God looked at my HHR and said, that's my car, then I would be driving home in a holy car. But I don't think God is so hard up that He needs a 2008 HHR. I think He gets around just fine the way it is. But how many of you getting the idea? Holiness and sanctification is the same thing. It's when God writes His name on you, say, you belong to me. When did God write His name on me? God wrote His name on me that day when I become one of the whosoever believeth should not perish, but have everlasting life. Whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord, talking about Jesus Christ, shall be saved. When you put your faith in Jesus Christ, sincerely put your faith in Him, God does something. Not only does He make a new creature out of you, everything changes, but He writes His name on you. I don't know. Did you know the book of Revelation says this about when He writes to 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, every one of those, except the last one, has blessings given to the overcomers. The last one is the only church that God never blesses because they're just too far gone. There are 2 churches of the 7 that God doesn't have a single rebuke for. Philadelphia and I don't know if the other Sardis, I don't remember right now. So there are 4 churches that God has good things to say and a couple of rebukes. But they're His churches. 2 churches again, no rebukes at all. 1 church, no promised blessings. But the others have blessings to the overcomers. One of them blessings is God's going to give us a new name when we get to heaven. I went through this life being called David. I'm going to be called something else in heaven for the rest of eternity. And I'm really going to like that name because God's going to name me. He already knows what that name will be, and I suppose in His mind I'm already that. But I'm still stuck on Dave. And I hope my wife is stuck on Dave. It's a good place for an amen. But anyway, that's the blessing. So, what we're told here, without holiness, no man will see the Lord, is the absolute truth. But what that means, if you haven't been separated from the world's pile of stuff and been placed into God's pile of stuff, you can't go to heaven. Having said that, your conduct is not going to get you to heaven. But having said that, when God separates you from the world's pile of stuff and puts you in His pile of stuff, He makes you a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things have become new. 2 Corinthians 5:17 and Ephesians 2:10. We have been created unto good works. I don't get to heaven because I do good stuff. Any good stuff I do that's acceptable to God, I do because He created me to do it. It's a byproduct of His hand at work in my life. Anything I do that generates from myself will never be acceptable to God. That's why He made me a new creature and created me to do the good works He wants me to do. Because now it's generated from Him and it's acceptable to God. That's a lot on the plate. I hope you can follow all that. So, but Putting it in practical terms, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Verse 15 in closing. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled, or the New Living Translation. Look after each other, so that none of you will miss out on the special favor of God. Watch out that no bitter root of unbelief rises up among you. For whenever it springs up, many are corrupted by its poison. The idea is everybody who's going to get to heaven has had their names written in a book called the Lamb's Book of Life for an eternity backward. There'll be no surprises to God. God knows every one of them. In the church world, the evangelical church world even, we like to suppose that everyone who goes to an evangelical church is going to heaven. Chances are that's not true. There are a lot of people that can play the game, but if they hadn't, from a heart of faith, called on unto the name of the Lord, they've never been saved. So Paul said, keep encouraging one another, or the writer of Hebrews. Keep after one another, keep encouraging. Can you believe? It rocks me every time I think about it. Can you believe that a guy who'd been singing in ministries around the world, best songwriter of my lifetime, Ray Boltz, took the turn he took in life? I can't believe it. In my mind, and only God knows the final thing, in my mind, he's got to make another U-turn back here before he dies. Because, in my mind, you can't live that lifestyle if the seed of the Holy Ghost is living in you. It would be so distasteful to you. So, we don't know. You know, I'm going to surprise you. I've been at this a very long time. God has never sat me down and showed me the Lamb's Book of Life. Never done that. I don't know whose names are in it. I really don't. I take people's word for it because I can't see their heart. Someone tells me they're a Christian, I believe them. Now, if I see them doing things that are just 100% contrary to Christian dogma, then I might not believe them anymore. But I tend to believe people. A lot of Christians are what we call weak Christians. And some are baby Christians even though they've been saved for 40 years. Paul talked about that. Or the writer of Hebrews did. They're still on milk. You can't feed them strong meat. So there are some Christians who get born into the family of God and just stay babies. And I know when Paul wrote to the Corinthians and others, that really irritated him. He wanted people to grow up in Christ. The author of Hebrews says in chapter 6, my goodness, you've been saved long enough, you ought to be teaching other people. And you still can't endure sound doctrine. One thing we learn from the Scripture is God genuinely, just like we do with our own children, want His children to grow up healthy. And so, since we don't get the privilege of looking into the Lamb's Book of Life, I don't know who's saved and who isn't. I have a pretty good idea of the people I know, but I'm not positive because only God has seen that Lamb's Book of Life. Some people play a good game. But the bottom line is, we're to encourage one another all the time. Stay in the faith. Be strong in the faith. No matter what the world's thrown at you, be strong in the faith.